Okay, so the 1920s, following after First World War, were a time of freedom and celebration, and everything was brilliant, or at least on the surface was brilliant, which led to this guy here, who's George Orwell, famous for writing 1984, to say this quote, that it is quite likely that fish and chips, art silk stockings, tinned salmon, cut-price chocolate, the movies, the radio, strong tea, and the football pools, that's gambling, have between them averted a revolution. So what he's saying here is that the access to these goods and these activities and the film and the cabaret and all of these things have allowed a revolution to not happen in Britain like it had happened in Russia in 1917 at the end of the First World War. And this is really clever and really convenient because by the time we get to the 1930s, there is a big change. And in Britain, we do avoid a revolution, but in other places that is not the case, because on the 29th of October 1929, the Wall Street crash happens, and the Wall Street crash changes everything and becomes a really big cause of the Second World War. So without going into loads of detail, Wall Street crash, finance, basically the stock market crashes, nobody has any money. And because America then doesn't have any money, they need to get their money from where they can. So they recall the loans back from Germany, Britain, France, so that they can support their own economy. In the meantime, completely devastating the economies of those European nations, and in particular Germany. There is a suggestion that when Gustav Stresemann fixes hyperinflation with the Dawes Plan and those loans, that Germany is dancing on the edge of a volcano, that they're having this fun, they're having all this freedom, they're enjoying all this money, but that all it takes is for America to ask for that money back, and they are back where they were before, if not worse. So what we start to see in the 1930s is a global economic depression. So people don't have work, people don't have enough food, people aren't being paid enough, and we get a massive increase in poverty. You see this image here, it's a really famous image of a woman in the southern states of America during the economic depression. And it's at a time when women were like trying to find ways to make their lives easier. So families were considering like selling their children or trying to get their children to go somewhere else so that they could afford to feed the ones they had. This woman was later interviewed and she was horrified that her picture had been taken in this situation. But you also see this one, which has this billboard saying that the world's highest standard of living is in America. And underneath them, you see a queue of people who are in line for a soup kitchen. So this is a queue of people who do not have work and who do not have food, or do have work, but it doesn't pay well enough. And it's not just in America, this happens everywhere. Here's an example, it's called the Jarrow Crusade. And this is one of a number of what were called hunger marches that take place in Britain in the 1930s, where again, people who are working or who are unemployed and can't find work cannot look after themselves, do not have enough money. And they are marching for the government to find them some sort of support, for there to be some sort of welfare, or for them to find them work. And in places like Italy, although this happened in the 1920s, you get fascist dictators like Mussolini take over. In the 1930s in Germany, this leads directly to Hitler and the Nazis gaining power because people don't trust the government that was there before because they caused the economic crisis, in their opinion. So they start voting for Hitler until Hitler says they can't vote anymore and he becomes a dictator. And the whole revolution, the change doesn't happen in Britain, but in Britain there were fascists as well. Fascists are people who believe in like a strong government and that your nation is better than everybody else's. So here's a photograph of a man called Oswald Mosley, who led an organisation called the Black Shirts. And they have very similar ideas to Hitler and the Nazis that they were trying to implement in Britain. So by the time we get to the late 1930s, because of this economic depression, we start getting closer and closer to World War II. And this map here shows the places that Germany has already invaded or annexed or reunified with by 1939, which is an area called the Rhineland, which is Germany, but they put their troops back in it, with Austria, with all of Czechoslovakia, and with Poland. They've all already been invaded before the beginning of World War II. And then on the 3rd of September 1939, Britain declares war on Germany and the Second World War begins. This is clearly quite a positive image, but this war is going to last 6 years and it's going to be horrifying and on a scale that nobody ever imagined. So hopefully that's been helpful, and you've seen at the end of the First World War how things rapidly and massively improved in the 1920s, but somewhat superficially when all of that comes crashing down after the Wall Street crash. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.